morning, Professor Anand. It's a pleasure to talk to you again. I trust you are keeping in good health during these pandemic times.
Thank you.
You may recall that we had a conversation a few months ago in Heritage Center. And it looks like many alumni have listened to it, and they want more of the same from you. So this is kind of a sequel to our first conversation, which was quite broad-ranging. And so I thought that maybe this time I'd like to ask you what you'd like to talk about in particular. Are there topics that you'd like to focus on? And if so, we will start with those.
Yeah, the primary things are the strategic plan, and as a follow-up to that, the research park, NPTEL, and recruitment of faculty.
Okay.
Of that, the research park, I've given a separate talk with the IIT alumni in Bangalore, and that's, I think, already linked to your Heritage Center site.
Yes, we have given a link from the Heritage Center website.
So I think I have said enough about the research park there. So I sort of confined myself a bit to NPTEL, and also really what the strategic plan did to us. A little bit about historically what happened in IIT. For the first 2 decades or so, there was really no money at all. I joined in 1972. Until about 92, when I became head of the department, there was practically no money at all. And even from 92 to 99, there was very little money. But we had started connecting with alumni, which is another important point that I want to make.
Right.
I think it's a good thing that we are connected to the alumni. You know that even better than anybody else does. And we had the Golden Jubilee celebrations that made us pause and reflect.
Yes.
What we have done right and what we have not done and so on. So I think that's an important point that I'd like to say a few words about. And then talk about the NPTEL itself as part of our mission that we failed to do, in my opinion, the IITs as a whole. But the IITs, I mean, it's not as if they didn't want to do it, but it just needed somebody to take the initiative and organize it. And then the participation from IITs has been excellent, and as you know, NPTEL has done very well. So I think those are the major things. Some of the academic changes that we were able to do when I was director. Talk about MA in the Humanities and Sciences department. About the task forces for curricular revisions and so on. And engineering design as a discipline. That new department that came up thanks to Bosch and Ashok. Those are the things, and possibly a bit about biotechnology, because the Mehta Foundation gave us that money for biotechnology. That, and then as part of reflections, I'd like to state some things that are important for IIT. That it's not so much advice as simply a word of caution that we have to be alert all the time. This is about our autonomy. That's it.
Okay, so let's start with maybe start with NPTEL, but you probably want to frame that in the context of our vision and the vision and the strategic plan.
Yeah, I think so. I think the big change in IITs came when Professor Natarajan was director, when Madhav Rao Scindia became the Minister for Human Resource Development. He was a very enlightened man, and he sent a letter to all the boards of the IITs saying that they should develop a strategic plan. So they should know where they are going. I think that's important, because we were so busy making ends meet and running the routine programs that we didn't have time to think about the future. In fact, even now, I mean, right through my tenure and possibly now, I think we're not thinking enough about the future. I think a fraction, there must be a subcommittee of the Senate at least that keeps thinking about the future. That unfortunately hasn't happened, but the strategic plan gave us an opportunity to do so. And as part of the strategic plan, several things were discussed. I think also at the same time, Natarajan brought in this ISO 9001, which was really a bookkeeping kind of exercise, but it's an exercise which involved all the staff. And many of the staff were able to participate in governance and give you suggestions that you wouldn't have had otherwise without their participation. So that happened. So the staff involvement was an important part of it. Then documentation of the strategic plan gave us some clear ideas as to where we were going. So it gave us ideas about the lacunae. One of the things I noticed was, first of all, they said the vision can be written by the director without consulting anybody. Whereas the mission is what the institute will do, and that doesn't depend on the director. The mission is independent of the director, but something that you will continue to do. And as part of the mission, it was clear that the mission was fourfold. One was education, the second was research, the third was industrial consultancy and connection with the industry. The fourth was improving technical education in the country. I felt that the fourth part of the mission, IITs hadn't done enough. We did some few things. We always were consultants for the regional engineering colleges and so on. We went there from time to time. We set up a lab here, a lab there, and so on. But it wasn't enough. It wasn't something sufficiently participative. So, and meanwhile, the knowledge economy came along. By 90s, the liberalization was announced. But by 99, I think true liberalization had set in. And we were already participating in the global economy, but not very well. And one of the big reasons for that, a UN report came out, I think 97 or 98, which pointed out that the enrollment ratio, the gross enrollment ratio, which represents the ratio of people in higher education by the number of people who are eligible for higher education. This number for us was 15%. For a population of 1.2 billion, with 1/3 of the people in the right age group, this was miserable. At that time, China, which is our constant comparison point, was at 30%. And the US and Europe were around 60 to 70%. Japan was at 80%. So I thought it was ridiculous that a nation of our size would have such a low gross enrollment ratio. So we did some quick calculations to see how many more colleges can be started. It turns out our typical colleges have about 1,000, strength of 1,000. So if you get 1,000 people coming into a college, you will have to start one college every week in order to catch up. So the brick and mortar model was out of the question. Actually, simultaneously, around the time I was thinking about this, I was dean academic courses at that time. I didn't know I was going to be director. But MHRD had actually arranged for a team of directors of IITs and IIMs to visit the US to study this problem of education using ICT, taking advantage of ICT. And they visited Carnegie Mellon in particular. I think Professor Natarajan led the delegation. And the Carnegie Mellon had a very successful experiment in Mexico, in which they had started online, essentially online education, but they created a large number of courses, technical education courses. And we felt that we certainly could do better. In terms of manpower, we had really good manpower, large numbers and so on. And there was a Professor Paul Goodman, who was Director of Strategic Studies in Carnegie Mellon, who had an interest, who had a big project. And he funded actually a workshop on technology enhanced learning in Madras. He came and spoke to us. Natarajan welcomed it and essentially put me in charge. So Paul and I discussed it, and we called people from other IITs. In particular, we had A.K. Ray from Kharagpur. A.K. Ray is one of the earliest people in education technology. He had done a remarkable job in IIT Delhi and was doing a remarkable job in IIT Kharagpur. But we needed to scale the whole thing up to increase the numbers. So we got together and made a proposal that was called the National Program on Technology Enhanced Learning. And the idea was to both improve the quality as well as the reach. Because while we wanted this GER to increase, we wanted people to be eligible for it and be able to get in. And we eventually wanted a virtual university, which I thought really would be the solution to the whole thing. But my own calculation, the thumb rule, was that we needed about 600 courses ready before we start a university. It's not an open university, it's a virtual university. There were admission requirements. I wanted actually a virtual IIT, but the other directors felt that the brand would be diluted. I didn't agree with that. I still don't. I think the brand is what you maintain. I mean, it's simply a matter of you must tell yourself once you call it an IIT, you will maintain the standard. But in any case, the program started, the NPTEL proposal was submitted in 99. It was 2003 before it was funded. What we suggested was that we run these courses on the web. connectivity was becoming very good. But Murli Manohar Joshi, the then minister, he said, you have to do video courses. He was very participative kind of minister. I mean, he didn't spend that much time, but when he came to the meeting in Delhi, and he said, you guys have to do video courses because the rural student in India can relate only to a teacher's face. And I think he was absolutely right. The video courses have been the ones that have been most popular. And he told us that he will create a channel, separate channel called Ekalavya channel. He said Ekalavya because he was the first distance education student in mythology. And he felt that this would be an appropriate name, and he will make the channel available for us to play our courses. Of course, in the beginning, we had very few courses. I don't know if you remember, Professor S. Srinivasan in electrical used to give a course on VLSI. And every afternoon, I listened to S. Srinivasan. When I went for lunch, half an hour, I had a lecture from him. Not that I understood much, but we had so few courses that we had to play the lectures again and again and again. But anyway, that was the beginning, and we got about 20 crores from the ministry, and another 5 crores for equipment, because we all equipped our various labs. And Professor A.K. Ray was primarily responsible. He was so thorough with all the equipment, it was a great bargainer. He got us a great deal from Sony for all the old IITs. We all have studios now that are very good because of A.K. Ray. Of course, they will need renovation again. I'm talking about 2010. 2001 when we set up this lab. But that's what happened. And then we had to discuss how are we going to run this program. And I felt one IIT can't take up this role fully, so we needed all the IITs to be participants. So I was made the chairman of the project implementation committee. And I quite gladly accepted it, and I felt that a director of one of the institutes should always be the chairman, because then you can make the others participate by talking to your colleagues. So we had a lot of discussions, many meetings, because all of us in faculty in IIT have strong opinions, not necessarily convergent opinions. But after a long discussion, after several discussions, every time we had a director's meeting in a different IIT, I would request, I'll go there the previous evening and request a meeting with faculty who are interested. And this happened in all the 7 IITs. And then finally we came to a consensus. We decided on some broad principles. First thing is we will offer it as a service. We will not take on an attitude of being superior institutions helping. We are just doing our duty, and we'll do it as service. So there are no questions that were considered silly. If anybody asks any question, you have to reply patiently. So for example, one of the arguments was that I can only teach at the IIT level. Then my reply was, you can teach only at, you are helplessly yourself. You can only teach at your level. So there's no point in your saying, I can only teach at this level. You teach at the level that is convenient for you. But if people ask doubts, then you have to give additional lectures to clarify what you're saying. That they all agree. In fact, I think typically Kamala Krithivasan gave, instead of 40 lectures, she gave some 52 lectures. But the 12 lectures were in order not to dilute the syllabus, but to make up for lack of background in the students. It was very well appreciated. The whole thing has been well appreciated, I must say. So we created about 325 faculty members were involved, and we created about 400 courses, I think, in the first phase. The second phase was funded much more liberally. In the first phase, I had to give a lot of arguments because I wanted roughly funding of 2 lakhs per course. Actually, a little more than that. Actually, I'm sorry, I wanted 7 lakhs per course, 2 lakhs for the subject matter expert for 40 lectures, equivalent material, and the remaining 5 lakhs for setting up studios in the various IITs, staffed with MSc or BTech graduates who would do a lot of support service. They would do animations, and they were remarkable. Our NPTEL studio people were very good. They stayed with us only for 2-3 years because they got permanent jobs and left. But in those 2-3 years, they made a difference to the whole program. And, they saved the faculty a lot of time because the faculty gave a sketch of what they wanted by way of illustration. They would do it actually. So all that worked out very well. And Mangal Sundar, of course, was the prime mover in the whole thing. He worked, I think he must have worked 16 hours a day. And the chemistry department was very kind to relieve him of some teaching duties, major. They allowed him to do this. And he really did a remarkable job. So with all these were set up, other faculty also participated. Kushal Sen was there from IIT Delhi. He was running the Ekalavya program. And then there was A.K. Ray from Kharagpur, there was Ghosh from Kanpur, and Shivgaonkar from IIT Bombay. So this is how it happened, and finally they all came together. As I said, the first principle was that we should develop the courses in modular form, because there were several universities, and the universities have different syllabi for the same course. And we needed to consolidate all the syllabi together, take into account inputs from our own faculty who said, in spite of all you're putting all this together, this whole concept is missing, this must be taught. So we included that as well. We came up with 8 modules, of which 6 modules satisfy the syllabus of some 6 modules, satisfy the syllabus of all the major universities. The 3 universities in the south, Anna University, the Visvesvaraya Technical University, and JNTU in Hyderabad, plus AICT Common Syllabus. So we did this, we insisted that faculty should do the lectures sequentially. There was a big argument about MIT. MIT lectures are phenomenally good. The open courseware started around the same time. I think, in fact, Chuck West told me later that he also had the idea in '99. But he didn't have to wait for money. And secondly, his was different. He was simply asking faculty who like to talk about subjects to give lectures on various topics. So they were topic-based, not syllabus course-based. And that made a difference because you're always very enthusiastic about a particular topic in your course. And they do a remarkable job, of course. But I told them that was like icing on the cake. But what we have, we don't have the cake of education in India. So we first had to create the cake. So then they all agreed, everybody agreed. In fact, within a few months, we were all on the same page. All the coordinators, the NPTEL coordinators, and then the faculty joined. I was amazed at the cooperation. 325 faculty were involved in the first phase. And they all developed courses. We also made subject teams. And these subject teams then distributed the courses among the IITs because initially we didn't want repetition. So we chose the courses so that there was no repetition. After phase, in second phase, we allowed repetition because you also want pedagogy to be different people teaching the course will teach it differently, and some students will like one type of teaching over the other and so on. So all that we did. We didn't pay too much attention to pedagogy because I was more worried about getting along with getting the courses on stream. It was only in the second phase that we started worrying about pedagogy, about various things. Meanwhile, what happened was there was a change of secretary, joint secretary and so on. There was a new additional secretary in N.K. Sinha in MHRD. The original joint secretary who supported us was Pandey, B.S. Pandey, and then it was N.K. Sinha. N.K. Sinha had a bigger idea. He created this national mission on education through ICT. That was a huge mission, 4,000 crore project. And there, in fact, I also helped him present it. He wanted me to come and present the thing and so on. It was very ambitious. Then NPTEL got subsumed under that. But we said we have to retain the name because by the time NPTEL was well known. So it must be called by the same name. He agreed. He gave us the money. He gave us the funding. In the second phase, we got 96 crores or something. And so that's how it happened, the whole thing. But we did make sure that several things were done. In the second phase, all the courses were in 4 quadrants. There were the lectures. Quadrants are not equal. The lectures were 3/4. In the rest of it, we had questions, typical questions that would come in university exams and so on. And questions with answers, so sort of a question bank. And then we had additional reading for those who were interested. So things like this, there were 4 quadrants in this. And further reading if they wanted to do research in the area and so on. So these things were all put in together. And everybody participated very well. So the whole thing came off well, and then we started distributing these courses initially by hard disk. And we actually gave it to individual colleges. We gave, I think for 2 lakhs or something, we gave 5,000 hours of lectures, covering several courses in civil, mechanical, electrical, and computer science. So this was the genesis of the whole thing. And I must say, when we distributed these, it was done completely free of cost, except for cost of the hardware alone. That is, they had to bring their hard disk and so on. And many colleges bought it, and they put it on their intranet. The internet then developed, and then it was in Guha, our alumnus, who is with Google. He was vice president of something, I don't remember. He came, and he was very impressed with what had been done. And he suggested that we put it on YouTube. Everything used to be a bit of a controversy. When he said YouTube, I thought immediately it's a good idea. But many faculty objected, saying there's a lot of bad stuff on YouTube. I said that will remain. So let's put some good stuff there and see what happens. But also, Guha did a great thing. He got us a YouTube channel without advertisement. So that was separately a YouTube channel for us. It turns out, actually, at the end of 2 years, we got the award for the most visited website under YouTube. It was remarkable how people were absolutely, they were desperate for good courses, things like that, and courses to a syllabus so that they could also write the exam at the end. Also, a lot of people who wrote GATE for entrance to postgraduate found this very, very useful. That's how it happened. It caught on, and a lot of people. Srivatsan, who was a former IIT Kanpur guy, who was at that time in charge of the IIIT in Bangalore. Later on, in Trivandrum, sorry. And he was right through a participant in all the meetings. Paul Goodman was always there. And he gave us a lot of good advice from his experience. And in fact, in Mexico, the vice chancellors participated in a workshop that we conducted here. They told us that the best students used to go to some 2 universities in Mexico. After this virtual university was floated, the best students came to the virtual university. It took some time for it to be established. But once the students realized that it was serious, good stuff, so that is a possibility. I mean, eventually people will want that flexibility. It will probably happen, but the virtual university was something that MHRD chose not to give it to me for at that time. And they gave it to somebody else and then switched back and said, "Will you do it?" I said, "No, I'm not going to take it." Once the thing has failed in somebody's hands, it creates a bad thing. Then you would spend all your time making up. So I said, "No, you have to go to somebody else to do this." Besides, I was getting a little tired. I was 8 years into the system. So I was going to quit. But Mangal Sundar continued. Now, of course, we have a very good NPTEL program. But the interactions between the IITs are not as strong as they used to be in the context of NPTEL. We still have a lot of interactions in other contexts. But in the context of NPTEL, I think the interactions are not quite as strong. But each IIT is doing very well. Andrew, Pratap, and Niket are doing a very good job in IIT Madras. They have this huge program of BSc Data Science. And also, overall, MOOCs have been running very well. NPTEL office is a very busy office. So I think it's worked out quite well. And it's been very timely. When the COVID came, it was very, very handy. Not that we anticipated any of it. But in any case, the thing was that you have to take opportunities as they come and positively. You can't very well say that YouTube has bad things in it, therefore I will not go with it. I mean, that's all bunkum. There's nothing that's completely saintly. There's nothing that's completely wicked. So it's a mix of everything, and you play the game along with them. And it's amazing how many people, in fact, 15%, the hits are over 300 million or something now. And 15% are from abroad. In fact, we've had several emails from abroad saying, can we pay for it? We've benefited so much from it, can I pay for it? But we refuse to take any money. I told the government of India the total expense is very small for you. And by not taking money, you keep the whole thing clean. Nobody can accuse any coordinator of running away with any money. So, and once they start looking at looking after the money, then they'll forget about this. So I think it's been, in that sense, the principles are right. And it's worked out very well, and it's been, in a sense, is a success. But it's like the Chinese proverb or something. It says it's easy to open a shop, it's hard to keep it open. I think it's going to be very hard to keep it open in the sense that Andrew and Pratap and all these people now spend so much of their time. And it's rewarding in itself, but we must think so. If you don't, and if you think your research is suffering and so on, then it becomes very difficult. And it's very difficult to find committed people who do this without a regret.
I think one thing that NPTEL has done is make our IIT faculty into global superstars. They get mobbed when they go to airports, and all kinds of people come up to them and say, thank you so much. I learned so much from your course. Yeah. I think that's been great.
That's very true. Even at the counter, people will tell you at the ticket counter, they'll tell you, sir, you're from IIT.
Yeah.
You are surprised at the kind of people who watch your course also.
And of course, I'm personally very happy that Usha, my wife, was associated with NPTEL for 5 years. It was a very exciting 5 years with phenomenal growth and so on.
She was a very enthusiastic manager. So she managed the whole show very nicely there in the studio. I think a lot of people now, Mani wives are involved, Balaji's wife is involved.
Yes.
He's doing a great job. Bharti is doing a great job. So I think all of these, there's a lot of talent on campus, and we also began to tap them.
Yeah, of course, the web and video courses have now evolved into MOOCs and live courses, certification courses, diploma courses, degree courses. I don't know, where do you see the future?
I don't know. Originally, I was thinking of NPTEL as a bank of courses for a virtual university. So I wanted a virtual labs. I wanted two things. Virtual labs I wanted. IIT Delhi gave a great proposal and they're doing it. I don't know if they're doing it now. They were doing it when I was there. And they did a good job. It's very hard. Virtual labs are very hard. And then so these were going on. I suggested that we should have 100 laboratories geographically distributed in the country and located in many private institutions. The MHRD should spend 5 crores setting up these undergraduate labs per institution. And that's not much money. 100 crores, 500 crores, and that's not much in those days. And I said, set it up and give it to them for 9 months. Let them use it fully. 3 months, they must run it for NPTEL. So the fellows can go from the nearest place, they can go and do these. That never happened. Partly because MHRD is always obsessed about private institutions misusing money and so on. He said a fraction will always happen. But a large fraction of them will do a decent job. You trust them, they'll also do a decent job. I think it hasn't happened as far as I know. So that needs to happen, then the virtual university can come. The virtual university can handle 20,000 people. In fact, I was trying, in a sense, I was looking ahead at the ministers talking about increasing the strength in IITs. I didn't want that. Not because I want to be exclusive, I just think it's very hard for us to handle such numbers. When I was director, there were 5,000 students. Now there are 10,000. In 10,000 students, you can keep them engaged in class. But outside class, having 18 to 22-year-olds on your hand, not being able to entertain them adequately can be a disaster. I, in fact, suggested to the minister that IITs are aspirational institutions. Leave them alone and let them reach levels of the highest in the world. Meanwhile, there will be models that can be copied. And then as we go along, we can copy them. But don't increase the strength in any one of them. But, Arjun Singh told us you're just being impractical. Politically, that's ridiculous because you're essentially encouraging exclusiveness. But this discussion came up earlier when Indiresan was director. And Indiresan said we are not elitist enough. In fact, he told the minister that we ought to be even more elitist. In a sense, that is true. It's not about snobbery. It's about seeing how far we can push ourselves. And you can't do that with a very large number. So, anyway, it's happened.
Do you think a program like NPTEL can be designed for schools?
In fact, it can be, and it ought to be, in my opinion. But I do think face-to-face one is important in schools. the NPTEL material can be used as a supplement. In fact, we did do that during 2008-2009 when N.K. Sinha took over and wanted to subsume this NPTEL in the thing. He couldn't provide us with funding, which he had promised already, because he was waiting for this to come through. I told him, you can't do that, and I can't check. I can't throw away all these trained people. I can't get them again. Then he said, you use them for any education purpose. And in Tamil Nadu, we use them for corporation schools and all that, 30 college schools. We developed material with the teachers coming in and using our NPTEL lab, NPTEL studio and the lab. And in fact, Mangal Sundar again helped in that. Also, Natarajan helped in that, physics. And they did remarkably well. They made 30 odd videos for courses 8, 9, and 10. Beyond that, people are too concerned about how well their children will do and so on. So we didn't want to. Also, this also takes a lot of time. The teachers were actually, I was amazed at the commitment of the teachers, school teachers who came. Many of them would finish at 4 and take a bus and come. So I insisted that they take a taxi or an auto and we pay from NPTEL. And they did that finally. I told them, you're just tiring yourself out, you can't sustain and do this. And they said, how will we pay for it? I said, you don't pay for it, I pay for it. So they were really remarkable. And, they came, they participated, they took a lot of interest. Worked out well, and our Mangal Sundar and Natarajan made physics and chemistry labs available. And the departments made it available. So they could do experiments there that were shown live to students in class. I think it's possible, but I think it should be in the form of supplementary material. It can't be the main. Simply because I think students need a teacher at that age. They need some role models. They need to see people being sincere about it. So, I've always been saying that the teacher should be paid much more. The school teachers. Anyway.
So we talked about Research Park, your earlier webinar, and we talked about NPTEL. I know that the third outcome that you were particularly happy about during your tenure was faculty recruitment. But first, I want you to repeat that anecdote that I always recall about when you realized that we needed to hire some young faculty.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
No, you start with that.
No, what happened in 98, I think, we gave Professor Lewis, who was then the president of the Alexander von Humboldt Foundation, we gave him an honoris causa degree. He couldn't come to the convocation, so we had a special convocation in September of that year. And all of us were met in the hall. It functioned as a formal function. It didn't have the same crowd as in the convocation because the students weren't graduating. But we had that ICSR conference hall full. And our photographers had taken a picture from the back. And when I was sitting with Professor Natarajan, he brought the photographic album to the room, and we both looked at it together. And all the heads were barred. I think we almost found no head that was not barred. But it told him. So I told Natarajan, time to hire the people. Reduce the age of the faculty. He laughed, but it was about his last year, 99 last year. So I think he did some, but not much. But I decided that that was the most important task. I still think so. I think if you hire good faculty, then you don't have to do anything else. They will run the show. And I think hiring good faculty is very, very important. We set up an elaborate procedure. We came up with an academic performance index and an overall performance index. The academic performance index was for teaching, research, and the PhD guidance and so on. The overall performance index included money brought in by projects for improving infrastructure in IIT. Consultancy was not counted there because consultancy has its own rewards. The faculty gets anyway from remuneration. So while they can do that to help themselves and to help their teaching, that wasn't counted in the overall index. But the research projects were counted, and things like FIST, money to improve labs and so on, all these were counted. So we had these indices worked out fully. I told the Dean Research and Dean Administration were the two people who knew the weights associated with these numbers. It was Professor Raman in computer science who made it logical. I mean, he never figures in all these things, but he was the one who told me you should normalize the whole thing. He says somebody may do only research and they may do it so well that you want to keep them. So you must say, in research, how many points will you give for research overall? So we did that, and so everything was expressed as a fraction. For example, if you only publish papers, and I'm talking about 2001 when we first came up with it, we said I would expect you to publish 125 papers in your career. So this was just a number, and we knew it had to change with discipline and change with things. Some refinements were introduced later, but this gave you an idea. So even if the others were columns are blank, you had a significant contribution to research because of which you could retain the faculty. So for promotions and for new faculty, for everybody, this was a very nice thing, and a lot of exercise was done. The best papers, the applicants were asked to name the best papers, and the best papers were read by faculty in the department, in the area. They made comments on it. Those comments came to the director. Head of the department forwarded. The head of the department also used it to screen the application. So it was a very long, huge effort. And before every recruitment, the three of us, the director, the dean research, and dean administration would visit the department and look at all the borderline cases and cases that were rejected with only a very close to the word and so on. And so after discussion, we called all these people, then they were selected. So we had about 600 on an average applications every year after screening. Out of that, we picked 35. That was the average score. I think Bhaskar has about similar number, maybe a little more. But he also finds that he can be sure only of about 35 people. Because once you take them, we don't have a system by which we eliminate them afterwards. So, and it's also not fair to eliminate them in an economy which doesn't have parallel. I mean, in the US, if you leave the university, you can go to the industry. Here you can't. Not yet. But in any case, so we did all this, and a lot of effort. And we didn't give the weightages to the people, but otherwise we did all this. We had international publications, national publications, and so on. One thing I couldn't get is the departments to tell me which were the most important journals there. I wanted to give them to give me ABC so that I could weight the articles published. But they said no. So what happened was finally we had this 35. So we had a recruitment of about 350 people when I was director there. About 125 retired. So we still ended up with about 500 faculty. Whereas when I joined, it was 320. When I became director, it was at 320. And the student strength was increasing. So we finally ended up with about 500. And I think now it's 600, 650 or something like that. Numbers have been increasing. And I remember that 3 years after the recruitment drive, the electrical engineering department faculty beat the students in the cricket match. Fair and square. Because lots of youngsters in the faculty who were good players, who so happened they were reasonably good players. So it was sort of a very reviving thing. You had a feeling that you had a lot of young people. There was some future in the whole thing. So basically the strategic plan did that. It did also, our ISO 9000 also cut down a lot of rules. There's always people complaining about bureaucracy. In itself, bureaucracy is not bad. It mainly says it's rule of the law. But I think we reduced it considerably because of ISO 9001. And thanks to a lot of suggestions from intelligence staff who are not shirking work, who simply said, this is unnecessary duplication, this should not be done. One of the recommendations, very peculiar, a very good recommendation, they said move the academic section to the ground floor, then your electricity consumption will decrease. Because students are coming to the fourth floor regularly using the lift. The number was so large that it would have been logical to shift the academic section to the ground floor. But for some reason, a lot of deputy registrars and assistant registrars, they had the reason. They said it's much safer in the fourth floor. And the possibility of theft, possibility of one fellow, one group doing things wrong with the academic section is very high. So keep it in the fourth. So I was just saying the level of participation in detail was remarkable. It showed a lot of staff were actually very interested in IIT and in its function. And Professor Gokhale ran the ISO 9001 first time. He did eliminate a large number of rules that we had that were not necessary. So that's
there is now a push to also recruit international faculty.
Yes.
What do you think about that? Do you think that will help the IITs in the long run?
I think it's very, very important. In fact, I wrote an article on, we had a Golden Jubilee Reflections, small booklet that I think Professor L.S. Ganesh had bring out. Different people wrote articles in it. One of them was me as director. And I wrote saying, Golden Jubilee is a good time to reflect on what we have done and what we want to do. And I said, if you compare us with the best universities abroad, mostly I'm familiar with US University, with the good universities abroad. We've done some things right. First thing is that we realized that hiring young faculty brings a breath of fresh air to the institution and giving them autonomy, complete autonomy. In fact, I insisted every young faculty member who joined come and see me. The first thing I told him was, you don't have a boss. Formally, although I am the boss, I'm telling you, you don't have a boss. The whole idea is for us to benefit from your ideas. And you have to cooperate with institutional schemes, but otherwise you are completely. Second was that money comes to research based on proposals given to various agencies. And that's good because that competition sharpens you. And so on. And we said we do need, we noted a few other things that we have done right. But we also said that we haven't done a few things right. One of the things that happens when you get rated internationally is the international character of the institute. And that depends on the number of international students you have and the number of faculty you have. And this, in my opinion, has always been important because while science is universal, the scientist has a cultural background and therefore a set of prejudices. If you have a mix of cultures, then you have some prejudices overcome easily because some of the faculty now don't have those prejudices. So that is really the crux of it. And I found that we were losing some 5%, 10% marks in the rankings. And that's a huge amount of marks. You can't very well expect to get to the top. Similarly, you needed graduate students who were from other cultures. I wasn't so particular about undergraduates, but at the graduate level, I wanted students to be selected by us for admission. I felt people would come. And that has happened. And I think it needs to happen more openly. Faculty, for example, we can hire visiting faculty, we can give them professor appointments, but for 5 years. I think that does not encourage a feeling of belonging. You need people permanently there, knowing that they can't be fired. Except unless they do extraordinary things. So I think that's where the crux of it was. I think it's more and more people are coming now, but I don't know if we have a provision for giving them permanent appointment. But I think that is important. And, so I think it's a good idea. It's a good idea to have 1/3 of your students, at least 1/3 of your students from other cultures, not Indians from abroad, but from actually different cultures. I think that's important. That's the secret of the success of the graduate school. That mix of students of different cultures, and that seems to help tremendously. And since it works there, why can't we copy it?
So as a director, you are quite active in building international relations as well as alumni relations. How do you think IIT Madras benefited and continues to benefit from these efforts?
I think the funny thing was that the alumni felt we were indifferent as an institute. And I think they were right to a large extent. But to be fair to us, I should also say that we were living hand to mouth. There wasn't this thing. But Professor Natarajan realized the importance of it and he started the in 1997, the silver reunion of the 72 batch of students was the first one that was conducted in some scale. I remember the students coming there, and I still remember this conversation with a bunch of students. I think I told you this. But they came and they wanted to give a donation, contribution for scholarship or something, I don't remember. I was Dean Academic Courses, so Natarajan sent them to me. Some of them were chemical engineers, and I'd given a lecture in one of their courses. So they came and said, we want to give you a donation. How do we know you use the money properly? So I said, how do I know you earned it properly? They were very upset. I told them, look, I don't mean to upset you, but I think you should realize that you have to give this money with humility, and I will receive it with humility, both for a bigger cause called IIT. And they were furious, but they came back next morning and said they agreed with me. And we are still very good friends. Many of them are good friends with me. But I did feel that they had a lot of ideas and they had no opportunity to express those ideas anywhere, any forum. Secondly, I also found that they didn't know anything about IIT after they left. So their whole idea of IIT was of an undergraduate institution. Whereas we had a large number of postgraduate students, we had really good thesis, PhD thesis, and so on. So finally, I said we have to talk to them about our research, about what we want funded, what projects we think are good, and so on. And it worked out very well. You came with me. You made a big difference in the Office of Alumni Affairs because you introduced a lot of procedures and that were very useful for contacting them. And, I think your promptness in replying to emails was itself a huge thing. It was a change from anything that had happened before. And the second thing was transparency. I had been insisting on transparency in administration, but you actually practiced it fully 100% in the alumni. I mean, anytime any contribution was made, IIT Madras was known to be the most transparent institute. Because you put up immediately how it was used, where it went, where it is parked, what it's used for. I think overall we built up relations. I think Bhaskar has taken it to greater heights. Subsequently, we became Dean. Now Mahesh is Dean. I think overall the alumni relations with IIT Madras are very, very good. And they also participated quite enthusiastically in the research part. Although they were getting a bit fed up because it took 8 years. So every year I go to IIT, you've been with me several times. Every time we spoke about the research part, there was a smile of skepticism on their faces. But in 2009, things changed. Suddenly they saw the beginnings of it. In 2010, a lot of them wrote to me saying, we didn't quite believe you, but it's actually become a reality. So I think it helped. But I knew this would take time. I wasn't going to defend myself. I allowed it to take time. So I think they've come up with a large number of ideas. Then the 81 by your batch, of course, came up with that C5 idea. Center for Innovation, which we were also very proud. It was actually a very good thing because along with the research part, we needed a center here, which was informal, which wasn't worried about money, but which would come up with ideas that were potentially good ideas for incubation and startup. I think the C5 has been, we got rid of one of the sheds in the workshop, the carpentry shed or something, and converted it to a C5. And as I said, I've always been amazed at the interest the students had in it and how they were smiling all the time, whereas they don't smile in class. But I think it's fine. I mean, it's just that they were interested in it very much. They were in phase. They did a remarkable job of managing it all on their own. He said, give the keys to them, don't. There was a faculty advisor who was always kept close touch with them. But I think they managed the whole thing on their own.
So I think that whole innovation to entrepreneurship pipeline is now so well laid out. So anybody can make the journey, so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And the incubation centers in the research park also doing very well. I mean, they know how to take care of this.
So I think starting new programs, new departments, new schools is another important thing for an institution to do to stay current. And I believe there was a School of Biosciences and a Department of Engineering Design that were started during your time. What are your recollections on how
the Department of Management Studies became independent only during my time. It was part of the humanities department. But we finally were able to push through in a charter.
Sure.
The only problem has been, in my opinion, I don't know if Bhaskar sees it also, basically that the management departments in the IITs don't deal too well with finance. And the financial management is a very, very important component for a management school. So we haven't, while we have publications, we haven't reached the kind of reputation that we could have, like the IIMs, if we had a strong group in financial. That hasn't happened. But in any case, that was the first one that took off from humanities and became a separate department. We had built a new library, so we gave the old library building, Department of Management Studies. And then we started MA in English. I always felt that our students who came from different backgrounds and usually had good general knowledge in the first year. Of course, my memory is all of the first few batches, all of your batches and so on. Up to about 83, 84, that was the transition from 5-year to 4-year. And up to that point, there was a lot of interesting conversation you could have with students outside your topic. And that I somehow thought was very important. It sort of shows a breadth of exposure and the chances of your getting ideas from other fields. And I somehow felt that was missing. It was used to be reflected even in the cultural programs that time, the Mardi Gras and so on. But it was getting a bit this thing. And I wanted a master's program in humanities. We had one with about 60 students in 3 disciplines: economics, development studies, and English. The economics will drop subsequently, but the other 2 remain. And the students who came to this program wrote the competitive examination at all India level. They were as selective as the JEE. In fact, there are a couple of people who got through JEE, got an admission, but took the MA program. So that increased the prestige of the program. Also, those kids could hold their own against the BTechs, because the postgraduates have always suffered in terms of confidence. And so the BTechs have owned the place for a long time. But I think the MA program helped even it out a bit. They were still the bachelor students, but they were students who MA students, and they were from a different, they had a different perspective. And that happened. We had several task forces that changed the curriculum and provided more electives and more choice. Then we had the engineering design program. The engineering design is becoming more and more important. I approached Seshasai and Ashok Leland, and he had Bosch and Ashok Leland were close collaborators, and brought in Bosch. And between Bosch and Ashok Leland, they gave us 8 crores to start a new department. That's how the engineering design department came. And that has been quite a good success. A lot of biomedical went in there, and a lot of classical design. It's not as if other departments don't do it, but I think the emphasis here is on design, synthesis and design. So that also worked out very well. So on more than that, in the strategic plan, while discussing it and during the reflections of the Golden Jubilee, we felt there were 2 important points that we need to emphasize. It's not as if we don't, but I think we don't emphasize it enough. One is autonomy, the kind of academic autonomy that we have had. And I think that needs to be preserved. You can't take it for granted. If you don't watch out, there will be interference from other sources. Because others have strong opinions, but your Senate should have discussed, and you must be the final arbiter. And second is what Charles Reed came from MIT to visit us. He gave a talk. He talked about what is called publicness. And publicness has to do with essentially structures that preserve the autonomy of an academic institution, even if autonomy means preserve it from interference from the government, even if it is funded by the government. That, I think, is an important characteristic. And we don't have such structures. We have to create them. It doesn't matter if we copy, we can always adapt it. We don't always copy for fact. We sort of copy and adapt to our conditions and so on. But I think that needs to be done. The other point that came out of the strategic plan is, Bhaskar is pretty aware of this also, that fundamentally our Senate should have future plans for it. I think it should discuss, there must be a mechanism by which a separate subcommittee of the Senate discusses the future, consults faculty, and brings it back to the Senate from time to time. And then you will see where you're going. I'm not saying you will see all of the path, but you will see part of the path. I think that's important.
Yeah, by the way, at institute level, now there is an advisory committee which has people from, from alumni and industry, which is a separate body from the board of governors. So hopefully that will be of some help in providing strategic directions for the institute in future as well.
My feeling is you need a board like that, but to that board, the agenda that comes to the board should be set by the Senate subcommittee.
Sure.
Because they are approach busy people, they're very good people, they're wise people, but they have their own commitments.
Sure.
They are not going to come up with ideas for you. You should come up with ideas which you take to them for refining and positioning properly.
So from an autonomy viewpoint, do you think the designation of IIT Madras as an institution of eminence is going to be of help?
Actually, I don't know too much about this institution of eminence. I was a bit disappointed with the wording. Institution of eminence, excellence I've heard, institution of eminence I didn't understand. Because we were already eminent anyway. The IITs are so few in a country with such large number of students. But I don't know if that is going to make a difference. Those are only words. I think unless we make a postulate saying, these are the ways in which we should guard against autonomy being eroded. Because nobody takes away your autonomy like that. They erode your autonomy in small ways. And you don't notice it. And after a while, it becomes a habit. I found this in Anna University. I was used to be on their syndicate. And I found that the Secretary of Education of the state never attends to syndicate meetings, but then writes to the Vice Chancellor saying, the following decisions of the syndicate may be deleted. And the fellow independently, I had met him in my capacity as director of IIT, he was a very decent guy. And I couldn't understand how he could even write that. And I found that he got used to writing it for Anna University because Anna University had never protested. It's a matter of habit more than anything else. And some of these things of commission are best handled by preventing them from happening. Once they happen, you have to actually fight the fellow. And the fellow deals with you on a daily basis with finance, everything, and then he can get, he can have a bad feeling about it and so on. So I think you have to prevent them. Prevention is much better than cure. So you have to prevent them. For example, in the MA program that we started, the Secretary of Education at that time told me, take the students from your JEE, go down the list and take them. I said, I won't. We discussed in the Senate and they all agreed that you need a different perspective. So you need students with different interests. And he was very unhappy. Kanpur said they will call the program MSc in economics. I said, I won't do that either. I call it MA in economics. And I will take it with you. Then secretary said, aren't you being unnecessarily fussy? I said, yes. I value my academic autonomy. I've already discussed it in the Senate and the Senate has approved it. Then he said, I didn't have the minutes of the Senate. He said, you will go back and write the minutes to suit your thing. I said, no, in 2 days you will get a. So I circulated it. And all Senate members signed it. All were present. It came back in 2 days. In fact, the secretary told me, if you have this kind of cooperation from your Senate, then I won't question your listen. So I think it's important that you be watchful. The secretary was a very good gentleman. I wouldn't, even if I named him, it wouldn't be anything because I know he was a gentleman. But he's harassed on many counts and he's been told from JE, you're rejecting a large number of good people, so you should take them. So that was his agenda. But that can't be your agenda. Your agenda should be, why should I teach this course? If it's interesting, who should I take for the course? And that we had discussed already. So I think it's important that from time to time you have to assert. It's like the way we do the ritual of closing a gate to show that we own the property. I think it's similar. There are some academic gates that you have to close from time to time, showing people that you are the final authority. Nobody can tell you what to do.
I remember you're saying that, as long as you have good ideas, they will leave you alone to execute them. So only if you don't have ideas, they will impose their ideas.
The problem is, it's not that we don't have ideas, we don't pursue them. We don't put them down in writing, we don't trash them out. Some will disappear, others will remain. and then you should carry them forward. That's how both the Research Park and the NPTEL. And I think because of Research Park and NPTEL, we had the advantage that the secretary was hesitant to call me. Because he said, if I call you, you will ask about those files.
So, Professor Anand, I think we have come to the end of the 1 hour. Thank you so much for spending the time this morning. Who knows, we may have to do one more of these to cover all the topics we want to talk about. But
let me just add one last thing that actually Chuck West told me. He told our Dean's Committee some meeting. He pointed out that as far as the university is concerned, the product is not the student, the product is education. He said, if you brag too much about a student, then you will have another student who is bad, who people can throw at you. The fact is that these students come with a certain background and you add some value to them. So what you add by way of value is education. And he said, you should always remember that the product is education, not the student. I think that's an important point. And he said the price of that education is tuition, but it will never meet the whole cost. It will meet only 1/3 of the cost. The rest of the money should come by way of subsidy from various sources, maybe from the government, maybe from industry. But he says the guiding principle is never cut down on expenses that can compromise product quality. You can instead constantly strive to find additional sources of money. I think this is very, very important. You have to keep that in mind all the time. So you can't say if an idea for improving education is a very good one, you must ensure that you get the money for it, rather than saying, I don't have the money, so I won't do it. You can postpone it a bit because you don't have the money, but you must have a time target in mind. I think these are some things that Western universities take for granted because they've been around for hundreds of years. But I think we should write it down and make sure that we practice it. Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Anand. That was a pleasure as always.
Thank you very much.